When I stepped out of the car and set my boots back on the gravel drive, I swear the land breathed with me. 10 years. 10 long years had passed since I had last stood here. The wind carried the scent of wild sage and pine needles down from the ridges, the same way it had when I was a boy. My grandfather used to say the land remembers who loves it. And as I gazed over the stretch of fields, weathered fences, and the old oak that still reached to the sky like a sentry, I knew he was right. The property wasn't just mine by inheritance, it was mine by bond, by history, by a bloodline carved into every stone and every root beneath my feet. But as I was reacquainting myself with this old friend, I heard the unmistakable shriek of someone who had no business here. "Hey, you! What do you think you're doing on my property?" I turned, squinting at the midday glare, and there she was, the kind of woman who could curdle milk just by looking at it. Mid-50s, stiff blonde bob sprayed into place, a visor clamped on her head, and that permanent scowl you see on people who believe rules were made for others but never themselves. A clipboard clutched in her manicured hands. She marched across the gravel in tennis shoes that probably never touched a tennis court. HOA Karen. She introduced herself with her volume rather than her name, pointing a finger like a weapon. "This is private HOA property, and you are trespassing. I don't know who you think you are, but we don't tolerate squatters here." I let her words hang in the dry air for a moment, studying her. I could already tell she was the type who had appointed herself queen of the neighborhood, the one who spied out her window with binoculars to count how long a car was parked, who'd file complaints about someone's grass being 2 inches too high. Only problem was, this wasn't her neighborhood. This was mine. "My name's Daniel," I said, keeping my voice calm, "and this land belongs to me. It was passed down from my grandfather. I have the deed." She actually laughed, this sharp nasal sound that sliced through the stillness of the afternoon. "You? Don't be ridiculous. This entire area is under the management of the Ridgeview Lakes Homeowners Association, and I've lived here long enough to know who owns what. That land has been vacant for years, and the HOA manages it, so don't you dare try to play games with me." I almost smiled at the audacity. Almost. But there was too much anger rising in me for a smile to win. 10 years ago, I had been forced to leave this land, driven by circumstances that would have swallowed me whole if I'd stayed. My parents had passed, my job had fallen apart, and grief had pushed me far away. But my grandfather's will had been ironclad. The land was mine, undisputed, unbroken. I had returned because I was finally ready to build again, to turn these acres into a home. And here stood this woman declaring herself queen of what wasn't hers. "I suggest," I said slowly, pulling the folded deed from my jacket, "that you take a close look at this before you embarrass yourself further." But Karen didn't even glance at the paper. She smacked it out of my hand, and it fluttered down into the gravel. "Forgery!" she snapped, her face mottled with rage. "Do you really think you can just waltz in here with some paper you printed off the internet? I don't know what scam you're running, but you're not going to get away with it." My patience thinned. "That is a legally certified deed filed with the county clerk. You're trespassing by standing here arguing with me." Her eyes flared wide at the word trespassing. She jabbed her finger again, shaking with indignation. "How dare you? You have no idea who you're messing with. I'm on the HOA board. I can have you fined, arrested, and removed faster than you can say squatter. This land has been maintained by us for a decade. We put up signs. We manage the access roads. I cut her off. "You put up signs on someone else's property? You managed what was never yours?" Her jaw opened and closed like a fish. And then, as though on cue, a couple of curious neighbors strolled up, drawn by the noise. One of them, a man in a baseball cap, looked at me warily and asked, "Everything all right here?"
Before I could answer, Karen pounced on the opportunity. "This man is an intruder. He's trying to steal Ridgeview land. He's aggressive, he waved papers in my face, and now he's threatening me." Her lies spilled out like venom. I straightened my back, refusing to let her poison sway me. "I am the legal owner of this property. I can prove it with official documents. You've been misled if you think the HOA owns this. They never did." The man frowned, shifting uncomfortably. His wife whispered something to him, and I caught the words, "Karen again." My guess was this wasn't the first time she had declared war on someone she decided didn't fit her worldview. But then, like pouring gasoline on a brush fire, Karen pulled out her phone and dialed 3 digits. "Hello, police? Yes, there's a trespasser on HOA property. He's dangerous and I fear for my safety. Please send officers immediately." My blood boiled. She wasn't just arguing anymore. She was weaponizing authority against me. 10 years away, and already my homecoming was being painted as a crime.
When the patrol car finally pulled into the drive, lights flashing, Karen stood tall like a victorious queen who had summoned her knights. She waved them over dramatically, nearly shrieking. "Officers, thank goodness you're here! This man refuses to leave private property! He's threatening us!" The officers looked from her to me, clearly already weary of her theatrics. One of them stepped forward and asked, "Sir, do you have any identification? Proof you belong here?" Wordlessly, I picked the deed back up from the gravel, brushed it off, and handed it to him along with my driver's license. He unfolded it, scanned it carefully, then looked up at me. His tone changed immediately. "This is valid. County seal, signatures, registration numbers all check out." He turned his gaze to Karen, who had gone pale. "Ma'am, this man is the rightful owner of this property. You have no claim here." The silence that followed was delicious, like thunder right before lightning strikes. Karen sputtered, But the HOA does not own land it never purchased or inherited," the officer cut in. "If you've been maintaining it, you've been doing so without legal right. You need to leave now." Her scream was part outrage, part desperation. "You can't do this to me! I've kept this place in order for years! He abandoned it! He doesn't deserve it!" That last line cut deep, but not in the way she intended. Abandoned? No. I had fought tooth and nail to survive after my family's losses. Coming back here was not desertion, it was reclamation. And Karen had just admitted she saw herself as the self-appointed ruler of land that never belonged to her. Neighbors watched, whispers rippling through the crowd. The illusion of Karen's power cracked right there in the open, under flashing lights and the weight of truth. And I realized then that this wasn't just about reclaiming land. This was about reclaiming dignity, shutting down entitlement, and making it crystal clear that no bully, no matter how loud, could erase what was rightfully mine. But what I didn't know was that Karen wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Her entitlement wasn't the kind to vanish when exposed. No, it festered. And as I would soon learn, she had every intention of escalating this war into something far darker. The police cruiser had barely left the gravel drive when Karen's voice came screeching again across the property line. It wasn't as loud now, but it was sharp, like the hiss of a snake after you've stepped too close. She was on her phone, pacing, muttering words like lawsuit, HOA, and lawyers, as though they were spells she could chant to conjure her lost authority back into existence. Her face was red, her hands trembling with rage, but her eyes, those eyes told me she wasn't finished. The neighbors drifted back to their homes, some shaking their heads, others whispering as they walked. A few glanced at me with sympathetic nods, as if to say, "We've all dealt with her, you just happened to step right into the storm." I knew that storm wasn't going to blow over. The next morning I came out with a thermos of coffee and a folder full of plans. The old farmhouse stood still, weathered but upright, and I intended to restore it. My grandfather's fences needed mending, the barn roof sagged, but all of it could live again. The land was mine, and I was ready to breathe life back into it. But sitting in the dirt of the driveway, like a warning flag, was a bright yellow paper taped to a stake. Notice of violation. I almost laughed out loud. It was stamped with the Ridgeview Lakes HOA seal, accusing me of unauthorized occupancy, failure to comply with HOA maintenance standards, and improper restoration without board approval. It demanded thousands of dollars in fines and threatened legal action if I did not vacate the premises immediately and return the property to HOA supervision. She really thought she had power here. I drove straight to the county clerk's office, where the same officer who had reviewed my deed the day before pointed me to the property maps. They were crystal clear. My land was carved out decades before Ridgeview Lakes HOA was even incorporated. The association's authority stopped half a mile from my western fence line. I was beyond their reach, immune to their petty rules, free from their fines, which made their notice not just invalid, it made it harassment. I filed a formal complaint. By the end of that week, Karen had escalated from notices to theatrics. She rallied her fellow board members, and suddenly my gravel drive was clogged with a caravan of SUVs. They stepped out in designer sunglasses, clipboards in hand, moving across my fields like they were assessing property they intended to seize. One man even measured the distance from my porch to the fence with a laser tool, muttering about non-compliant setbacks. I came out onto the porch, arms crossed. "You're trespassing. Get off my land." Karen lifted her chin, her voice dripping with condescension. "This property has been under Ridgeview stewardship for over a decade. We've invested in maintaining the access roads, signage, and appearance. You can't just come back after abandoning it and expect to undo years of community care."
Community care? I barked a laugh. You dumped gravel on the road and put up signs that didn't belong to you. That's not stewardship, that's theft. And I didn't abandon anything. Life took me away, but the deed never changed. My name has been on it every day for the past 10 years. You've been squatting on my inheritance. Her entourage shifted nervously, but Karen pushed harder, her voice shrill. "We have minutes from meetings, Daniel, records showing that this land has been part of the association's maintenance obligations. If it's been treated as common property, then it belongs to the HOA by precedent." The sheer arrogance nearly stunned me. Precedent? Was she truly trying to argue that years of trespassing gave her ownership? I pulled my phone from my pocket and hit record. "Go ahead, Karen. Say that again, loud and clear." Her mouth snapped shut, eyes narrowing when she realized what I was doing, but it was too late. I had the words I needed. By the following week, my complaint had reached the county attorney's office. A cease and desist order was issued against Ridgeview Lakes HOA for harassment and unlawful claims of ownership. Copies were mailed to the entire board. That should have been the end of it. But Karen was not a woman who accepted endings unless they were written by her own hand. She began a campaign of war. Trucks mysteriously dumped piles of gravel across my driveway in the dead of night, blocking access. Trash appeared on my fields, bags of rotten food, old tires, broken appliances. Someone spray-painted HOA land across my barn door in dripping red letters. Each time I filed a report. Each time the police documented it. Neighbors began to whisper louder now, the tide of sympathy shifting toward me as Karen's desperation painted her not as a leader, but as a lunatic. And then came the night of fire. I woke to the smell of smoke and the crackle of flame. My grandfather's old shed, the one that had stood for 40 years, housing his tools and memories, was engulfed. By the time the fire department arrived, it was ash. The fire chief pulled me aside, his jaw tight. Accelerant was used. This was no accident. I knew exactly who was behind it. And that was when my patience ended. The law had been my shield until now, but it was time for the law to become my sword. I hired an attorney, one who specialized in property disputes and HOA overreach. Together we gathered everything: the videos, the cease and desist orders, the reports of vandalism, the fire chief's statement, every false notice she had posted, every time she had claimed ownership that wasn't hers. It all went into a file thicker than a phone book. And then we filed suit.
It wasn't just against Karen. It was against the entire Ridgeview Lakes HOA board. Charges: harassment, trespassing, vandalism, arson, and attempted unlawful seizure of property. The summons landed like thunder. Suddenly, Karen's smug mask cracked for all to see. The same neighbors who once cowered beneath her wrath now saw her as what she truly was: reckless, dangerous, and out of control. Some even came forward with their own stories, fines that had no basis, threats she had made, intimidation tactics she had used for years. When the court date arrived, Karen strutted in with her usual false confidence, but by the end of that trial, her world had unraveled. The judge listened patiently as my attorney presented deed records, county maps, police reports, fire investigations, and videos. He read the cease and desist order aloud in court, glaring over his glasses at the HOA's counsel. When Karen tried to interject, the judge silenced her with a gavel crack that echoed like a rifle shot. "Miss Wilson," Karen's full name dripping with authority she couldn't override, "your claims are baseless. This property has never belonged to Ridgeview Lakes HOA. What you and your board have done is nothing short of harassment bordering on criminal conduct." Karen's face went pale. Her voice, usually sharp enough to cut glass, came out as a desperate whisper. But we kept it beautiful." "You vandalized, you trespassed, you destroyed, and for that you will be held accountable." The verdict was swift. Restitution for the shed and damages, reimbursement for legal fees, and punitive fines against the HOA. And the county prosecutor announced right there in the courtroom that a criminal investigation into the fire was ongoing. Karen collapsed into her chair. Her reign as self-appointed queen burned to ash just like the shed she destroyed. As I walked out of the courthouse, the neighbors who once whispered now stood tall beside me. They shook my hand, clapped me on the back, some even apologized for not speaking up sooner. The land was mine again, not just in name, but in peace. The fences could be mended, the barn restored, the house rebuilt. But more importantly, the land remembered. It remembered my grandfather, it remembered me, and now it bore the scars of a battle won. Karen never showed her face on my property again. Word spread fast. Ridgeview Lakes had been humbled, their power stripped, their queen dethroned. And as I stood under the oak tree at sunset, watching the shadows stretch long across fields that belonged to me and me alone, I felt the land breathe again. Not with chaos this time, but with quiet, righteous vindication.